Good morning. My name is Julie Dahl. I'm manager with Regulatory Review with DFO's Fisheries Protection Program. And today with me is Sarah Eddy, a senior fisheries protection biologist, also the assessor on this project. Today I will be presenting the Fisheries Protection Program presentation on behalf of Fisheries and Oceans Canada with respect to the Deep Geologic Repository Project proposal. In this presentation, I will give a brief overview of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, also referred to as DFO, regulatory responsibilities, and the roles in this project review. I will also present the conclusions of the project review undertaken by the Fisheries Protection Program of Fisheries and Oceans Canada and our recommendations. Fisheries and Oceans Canada has concluded that impacts to fish habitat from the DGR project as proposed and with the implementation of recommended mitigation are unlikely to occur. The Canada Constitution provides the federal government with the authority to manage coastal and inland fisheries and administer the Fisheries Act and conduct fisheries research. The Constitution Act gives the federal government exclusive legislative authority for seacoast and inland fisheries. The Fisheries Act arises from the Constitution and was established to manage and protect Canada's fisheries resources. DFO is responsible for administration of the Fisheries Act, and through a ministerial order, Environment Canada is responsible for Section 36 of the Act, which pertains to the deposit of deleterious substances. Fisheries and Oceans Canada also has responsibilities for aquatic species at risk under the Species at Risk Act established in 2002. Fisheries and Oceans Canada has many sectors and programs, each with responsibilities pertaining to the department's broad mandate for marine safety, aquaculture, fisheries management, habitat management, oceans management, aquatic species at risk, and fulfilling obligations under federal environmental assessment regimes. The Fisheries Protection Program of DFO is the lead for the department when participating in federal and provincial environmental assessment processes and in regulatory processes under the Fisheries Act. For this project review, Fisheries and Oceans Canada is an expert federal authority providing input to the Joint Review Panel under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act regarding potential impacts to fish and fish habitat. Specifically under the Fisheries Act, DFO is responsible for managing and protecting Canada's fisheries resources. This includes conservation and protection of fish habitat and management of fisheries. Fisheries management responsibilities are delegated in some jurisdictions, and I will explain this in the next slide. The Fisheries Act applies in all fishing zones and waters in Canada and is binding on all Canadians and all levels of government. I'd like to clarify my earlier statements regarding delegation of fisheries management responsibilities in some jurisdictions. Although Fisheries and Oceans Canada has responsibilities for fisheries management under the Fisheries Act, this is a shared responsibility in some provincial jurisdictions. The Constitution Act of 1982 established the roles and authority of the Government of Canada and provincial governments with respect to fish and fish habitat, with the Government of Canada being responsible for sea, coastal, and inland fisheries and fish habitat, and provincial jurisdictions including the power to make laws pertaining to the right to fish and to convey that right. In Ontario, as in many provinces, the day-to-day administration and management of inland fisheries has been delegated to the province, and it is delivered under a delegation agreement with the Ontario government. The federal government retains responsibility for reporting to Parliament on conservation of fisheries resources under the Fisheries Act and has jurisdiction to legislate with respect to the protection of fish habitat and waters frequented by fish. DFO is guided by definitions of fish and fish habitat that are provided in the Fisheries Act. The Fisheries Act defines fish as including shellfish, crustaceans, marine animals, and their various life stages. The Fisheries Act defines fish habitat as spawning grounds and nursery, rearing, food supply, migration, and any other areas on which fish depend directly or indirectly in order to carry out their life processes. In Canada, fish and fish habitat are protected by the Fish Habitat Protection provisions of the Fisheries Act. Fish need healthy places to live, feed, and reproduce, and corridors to migrate between those places. The Prohibition against harmful impacts to fish habitats recognizes the important role that habitat plays in sustaining healthy fish populations. Subsection 35(1) applies to works, undertakings, or activities, and it is a prohibition against the harmful alteration or disruption or destruction of fish habitat. Subsection 32(1) prohibits the killing of fish by means other than fishing, and under subsection 30 sub 1, the minister can require fish guards or screens to prevent the passage of fish into any water intake that directs water from a Canadian fisheries waters for use for irrigation, manufacturing, power generation, or domestic use. The Fisheries Act was recently amended, with 2 rounds of amendments receiving royal assent in June and December of 2012. Some amendments are in force now, and others will come into force on a date to be determined by Order in Council, and it's anticipated in the fall of 2013. A significant change will be a new Section 35(5) prohibition against serious harm to fish. Specifically, the prohibition will state that no person shall carry on any work, undertaking, or activity that results in serious harm to fish that are part of a commercial, recreational, or aboriginal fishery, or to fish that support such a fishery. Changes to the Fisheries Act are not anticipated to have implications for DFO's review of the DGR proposal. Review of the proposal was undertaken pursuant to the current fish and habitat protection provisions as stated in the currently applicable Act, specifically being the Section 35 prohibition on the harmful alteration or disruption or destruction of fish habitat, and Section 32 prohibition on the killing of fish. DFO is also responsible for aquatic species at risk not located in national parks. The Act contains prohibitions against killing, harming, or harassing individuals of an extirpated, endangered, or threatened species, as well as prohibitions against damaging or destroying the residents of a listed species, and prohibitions against destroying critical habitat where it is defined in a recovery plan for the listed species. There are no aquatic species at risk to which the Species at Risk Act would apply on the proposed DGR site or adjacent to the site. With respect to assessment project interactions with fish and fish habitat, there were 4 key components of the proposed project that were assessed for the potential for interactions with fish and fish habitat, these being site preparation, the north-south railway ditch crossing, Stream C in Lake Huron, and on-site blasting during construction. With respect to site preparation, regrading and site clearing is anticipated to result in a minor reduction in surface water flow to Stream C. DFO concludes that this small reduction will not be detectable at Stream C within the normal seasonal variation in surface flows, and as such, no prohibited impacts to fish or fish habitat are anticipated. A new culvert crossing is proposed within the north and south railway ditches. Although warm water bait fish and burrowing crayfish are noted to occur in the south railway ditch, this crossing itself is small in scale of impact, and the habitat was assessed as being of low sensitivity and resilient to this minor disturbance. As such, DFO concludes that by following proposed mitigation measures, impacts to fish and fish habitat will be negligible. No prohibited impacts to fish and fish habitat are anticipated. For Stream C in Lake Huron, the stream is located a minimum of 500 meters from the edge of the construction site, and the stream flows into Lake Huron. DFO has concluded that there are no construction activities proposed near the stream or near Lake Huron that would disturb fish habitat in these water bodies. Again, as such, no prohibited impacts to fish or fish habitat are anticipated. OPG proposes to use explosives at distances away from water that are greater than those identified in DFO's guidelines for the use of explosives in and near Canadian fisheries waters. As such, DFO does not anticipate any impacts to fish and fish habitat due to blasting, and no prohibited impacts to fish or fish habitat are anticipated. In conclusion, DFO has one recommendation, that being that the mitigation measures that have been identified by the proponent be implemented for the construction of the wet railway crossing. These mitigations would include embedding the culvert to maintain bottom substrate, isolating the culvert during construction, working within timing windows, revegetating the banks upon completion, and installation of sediment control measures during construction. These latter two measures are largely to control downstream migration of sediment to stream C and to protect the habitat in that water body. So the impacts to fish and fish habitat from the various components of the proposed project, including site preparation and construction and blasting, are anticipated to be negligible. The implementation of proposed mitigation measures for the culvert crossings will mitigate impacts to fish and fish habitat, and no approvals or authorizations from Fisheries and Oceans Canada will be required.